So if you remember what we've spoken about in the past is we're looking at how to think spiritually, we're looking at how to think like an angel, and we're also realizing that we do this naturally, and sometimes it passes us by. We don't realize we're actually doing it. And I hope you'll get a really good sense of this today when we talk about person. So just as an introductory passage, I've got this from Arcana Celestia, Secrets of Heaven, where Swedenborg writes, "There are three things in general that perish from the literal sense of the word when it becomes the internal sense. Namely, what is of time, what is of space, and what is of person." And then he goes on and he says, "In the spiritual world, nothing is regarded as determined to person, because directing the attention to person narrows and limits the idea instead of extending it and making it unlimited." So, I want to start with this. We have an interesting problem when it comes to understanding God. There are a variety of words we use to describe God. We say that God is infinite and eternal. We say that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, if you know all of those words. But our problem is that we are finite. We are limited. And so, whilst we have all these fancy words to describe God, we actually don't have an experience of what those things actually are, what they mean. So, for example, infinite for us means something that's just really, really big. But that's not infinity at all. That's just really, really big. So, how do we approach understanding God? Well, I think there's a two-stage process that we go through. The first thing is that we have to put God into a shape and form, into an idea that we can understand. An idea that we can have a relationship with. That's the first aspect, the first thing we must do. And the second thing we must do is we must realize the limitations of those ideas. So we start with an idea which gives us some sense of something about God, but then we realize the limitations of it. And we'll explain this a little bit further as we go on. Right, I'm going to share some more from Swedenborg's work. This again is Arcana Celestia, and I've broken it up into two sections. He writes, "The angels in heaven know and acknowledge nothing else divine than the Lord's divine human. For this they can form a mental picture of and can love. But they cannot form any such picture of, nor therefore love, the divine, called the Father, since this is incomprehensible." So we form a mental picture of something that we can comprehend, but there's something about God, the divine, as he truly is in himself, we just can't grasp, and we never will. He goes on, "What is incapable of being seen or heard is incapable also of passing into the mind to form a mental picture, and is incapable of passing into any affection and love. That which is to be comprehended in faith and love must be given objective reality in a suitable image." In the new church, this is one of the reasons why we tend to refer to God as the Lord. And it's become habitual to me, and I guess to many of you, if you've grown up within the church, to refer to God as the Lord, because the Lord is a personal term. So we put the Lord into person to be able to have a relationship and an understanding with him. But then we have limitations with that. And We read this a few weeks ago from the prophecy of Nahum. God is jealous and the Lord avenges. The Lord avenges and is furious. You see, in putting God into the image of a person, we superimpose many of the failings of humanity on our view of God. It becomes too easy to make God in our image rather than the other way around. So when we talk about the Lord in the Bible, we've got to look at the qualities of the Lord which are inherent in the Lord, not inherent in us. Now, I'm going to share this one with you next. This is a bit of a mind bender, I have to warn you, so we'll take our time getting through it. From True Christian Religion. He says, think about God in terms of essence. And from this, think about person. Thinking in terms of person about essence means thinking materially about essence too. But thinking about person in terms of essence means thinking spiritually also about person. How'd you go getting your head around that one? It's tricky, isn't it? Essence and person all over the place. So this word essence, think of what is essential. What is essential? Think about God in terms of what is essential, as in essentially divine, and from that, think about God as person. So make the essence of God the first thing that you do. Now, I'll help you explore and work this out. Okay, here's my first example. Friendship. Now, think about a young child learning what friendship is. We learn about friendship from where? We learn about friendship from our friends. Okay, so our friends, as we begin this process, embody what friendship is. We learn what friendship is from having friends, from interacting with them. But then, you look at a playground and watch children struggling with friends and friendship. And what you come to realise, and what we come to realise, is that just because we call a person our friend doesn't make them our friend. The person doesn't define what friendship is. We come to the point of realising that there's a thing called friendship. It's a set of qualities. And our real friends are the ones who exhibit those qualities. And that's a shift. It's a fundamental shift in the way that we think. So instead of thinking from person to essence, which is what we do in young childhood, these are my friends, so I love my friends, we start to think of what is essential about a friend and then work out who is our friends by who exhibits those qualities. That's what that passage is saying. Okay? So we begin by understanding friendship through our friends, then we define our friends through the qualities of friendship, and that's the proper way to do it. Now, Swedenborg also talks about this in terms of the neighbour. Now, you're familiar with many of the things that Swedenborg writes about the neighbour, and he says, this is from New Jerusalem in its Heavenly Doctrine, he says, in the broadest sense, goodness itself is the neighbour, since people are neighbours according to the nature of the good that they do, which they get from the Lord. So, in that very childlike state, we tend to think, oh, I need to do good to everybody, that's loving the neighbour. But then as we grow, we realise that what is the neighbour is the qualities inherent in that person. And it is the good within the person that we are to treat well, not necessarily the person themselves. And we are to encourage and foster that good. That is loving the neighbour. It's a fundamentally different way of looking at it. So that's working from essence to person. Another example is angels. Now, the word angel in the Bible is true of both the Hebrew and the Greek. The word can also be translated messenger. Now, let me ask you, what makes a messenger? How do you become a messenger? You're doing one very important thing. What is it? If you're a messenger, what are you doing? You have a job. Communicating what? A message. Absolutely right. You're communicating a message. So, a messenger is a messenger by virtue of the message they carry. You cannot be a messenger without a message, can you? It's not possible. You're not a messenger anymore. Now, this is this word, angel. It's this same word. And it shows us that what makes an angel is the divine qualities, the message they carry from the Lord. You see? Angels are not angels by virtue of themselves, but by virtue of what they carry, the essence of the thing. So that's this idea. I'll just go quickly back to it. That's what this passage here is saying. It's the essence that makes the thing, not the person. All right, I want to apply all of this. There are problems with getting stuck on the idea or fixated on person. Now, we actually read a couple of them in the Bible this morning. So that story of Naaman, remember what Naaman did? He gets sent to the land of Israel to find this cure for leprosy. And there's this rather interesting little interaction takes place. He goes to the house of the prophet, and what does the prophet do? He sends out a messenger. What's Naaman expecting? Naaman's expecting actually to be greeted by the prophet himself. Now, Naaman gets a bit upset by all of this. Oh, that's a bit rude, isn't it? You just send me your secretary instead of actually turning up yourself. And then he gets worried about the fact that he has to dip in the Jordan River. Why can't I go to some other river which is much better? The rivers at home are much nicer than the Jordan River. Why this one? He gets fixated on this idea of person. He gets fixated on the idea of, I'm an important person, I ought to be greeted by an important person. The disciples of John and the Jews, in their little interaction, they come to John and they say, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you have testified, behold, he is baptizing, and all are coming to him. But listen to John's response. John says this, a man can receive nothing unless it has been given to him from heaven. Goes on, you yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is fulfilled. And he says, he must increase, but I must decrease. John's disciples and the people with him get all tied up in knots about the fact there's this other bloke come along and he's doing exactly the same thing as you're doing, and they're all going to him. But what does John say? He says, he must increase and I must decrease. Don't get tied up with my person. That's who you should be following. The idea of taking credit or merit is a term Swedenborg uses. Attributing what is true and good to oneself is something, that's a way that we can get tied up with person. We think, oh, aren't I a good person? All this good, the good things that I do, aren't I wonderful? That's getting tied up with person. We need to acknowledge the good that we do comes from the Lord and merely flows through us. The other side of that is flattery. You know the story of King Canute. Does everybody know the story of King Canute? The ancient King Canute, the ancient English king. Very quickly, the story is he has these men come to him and they're after something. So they're telling him how wonderful he is and powerful. And, oh, you're the greatest king in the world and you must be able to have so many wonderful powers. And so what he does is he takes them to the seashore, he puts his throne on the sand and sits on it. And he says, well, if I'm so powerful, I will command the tide to stay out so I don't get wet. And of course, so he commands the tide, and what happens? The tide comes in. You see, he's conquering this flattery that's going on with these two gents. But then on the other hand, we have blame, don't we? And we have scapegoating. The way that we attribute evil to people, either to ourselves or to others. These are ways we get tangled up in person. All right, I want to share with you two very particular applications that I found very useful. One of them was very surprising to me. A few years ago, we went on holiday, and I've told you before that I go op shopping for books. Pam's in the clothes section and I'm in the books section. And I picked this one up in an op shop a couple of years ago. Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman, apparently a very well-known psychologist. He says, our thoughts are not merely reactions to events, they change what ensues or what follows. When we overestimate our helplessness, other forces will take control. What Martin Seligman is interested in is what he calls an increase in both depression and violence, particularly in the US. And he's looking at our thinking processes and how they encourage this to take place. And his basic premise is what he calls an explanatory style. In other words, how do you explain the things that happen to you? So you imagine you put yourself in some event. It might be a pleasant event or it might be less pleasant. How do you explain it to yourself? What's your inner chatter about that event? So he talks about pessimism as being a particular explanatory style. Now, this is what I found really interesting. It includes an idea of permanence. So if you meet a difficult situation and you say, this always happens to me, the idea that something is a permanent state. Now, that's about time. That's about time. It always happens to me. The second thing he says is pervasiveness. In other words, if you meet a difficult situation and you say, everything I try goes wrong, that's about space. Everywhere I go, everything I do is wrong. These lead to pessimism. And then personalisation. I am so stupid. I am uncoordinated, ugly, anything you can tell yourself about yourself based on an event. This is getting focused on person. And what Martin Seligman suggests is, if we can spot ourselves doing this, we can reset the way we think about a particular event and then reset the way we react to life as it follows. And I just found it really interesting that in these 3 points, he's saying the way to reset your mind is to rethink about the way you think about time, space, and person. And it seems to me such a powerful thing to be able to do. Time, space, and person. Can we think, okay, this is a one-off event. It doesn't always happen to me. Can we realise not everything that I do goes wrong? Can we realise that a particular event doesn't define me? The final one I'll bring you is this. This is my second application. I always struggled with this passage as a young minister. Anyone whose belief is different from the priest's should be left in peace, provided he does not make trouble. If he does make trouble, he should be expelled. For this too is in accordance with order, for which purpose the priesthood exists. I say I always struggled with this as a young minister. Am I supposed to go to the parishioner who is vocally outspoken and disagrees with me on a particular issue and send them away? Is that what I'm supposed to do? I realised at some point that actually that's getting caught up in person. And what I needed to do was look at this in terms of what's the principle behind it, or what's the principle behind the person. So what is the principle behind the priesthood, behind the ministry? And my answer was, from reading the teachings, a love for the salvation of souls. So instead of getting caught up with the fact that here's someone who disagrees with me, I need to weigh up both of us in terms of whether we agree with the principle of the love for the salvation of souls. And that needs to be our guiding principle in these disputes. That needs to be the thing we focus on in the church as the direction setter. That's where we're going. Not that you follow me, but that together we work towards the salvation of souls. All I'm going to do now is ask you in the week ahead to think about the way you reflect on person. The individuals that you meet, yourself, as you read person or people in the Bible. See if you can understand what's behind them and what's the important principle to be drawn from what you read and the situations and circumstances and relationships that you find yourself in.